From claiming that the league's going to continue for many more years to getting fired because of his controversial nature, here's Greg Norman's appalling response to the LIV Golf controversy. The Aussie legend knows how to create some drama and put himself in the limelight because while everyone's busy trying to figure out the details of the massive merger, Greg's out here tooting his own horn. The PGA Tour players are upset, and for good reason, since Commissioner Jay Monahan backstabbed them to make a deal with the enemy, the Saudi PIF. But while they're calling for his resignation, there's been even more pressure on Greg because both Rory McIlroy and Jay have said that LIV Golf's not going to exist after the deal goes through. Well, Greg thinks that's a whole load of nothing from those guys, because he's on a victory lap right now claiming the league's not going anywhere. Remember, the Aussie only found out about the merger about 30 minutes before the rest of the world. Plus, the official agreement didn't mention LIV Golf in detail either, meaning it wasn't exactly a big part of the PIF's new plans. And yet, Greg just does not care because he sent emails to his staff talking about how bright the future is for LIV. He says the deal's opened up some massive opportunities for the league, and they can finally attract more sponsors and TV networks. Also, he claims that despite the merger and what everyone's been saying, LIV will continue to be a standalone enterprise, and its business won't change. "We changed history and we're not going anywhere," is the exact line he used in his email, which is bold, especially when you consider that he's not a part of the new global entity's leadership at all. That's spearheaded by Monahan and the PIF's governor, Yasser Al-Rumayyan. So how's Greg claiming all this stuff? Here's the thing, that's what he does. He knows how to get all the attention on himself, even when he's being forced out of the picture. But what about Rory and Jay, who've clearly said LIV won't be a part of the new deal? According to Greg, they don't know anything. In fact, that's been his stance right from the start. Back when Rory called him out, asking him to step down from his position in LIV, Greg wasn't having any of it. He said that while Rory might be a part of the Player Advisory Council on the tour, he doesn't know the real facts. So his advice to the Irishman was to sit back and watch the words that come out of his mouth. After all, things change quickly in this sport, and Rory might regret what he's been saying. You've got to hand it to the guy, though, because even though this felt like an overly aggressive statement, it did come true later. Rory looked lost at the Canadian Open after the merger's announcement, saying he felt like a sacrificial lamb since he'd been fighting this war for the tour. But he still didn't back down from his stance, and added that LIV players can't simply walk back into the tour now. Greg probably doesn't have an issue with that, though, because most LIV members don't want to go back anyway because of the tour's hectic schedule. Plus, the Aussie also says he's working on next year's LIV schedule already, which again is insane considering his own future isn't secured. But hey, he's still the CEO, so there's no reason for him to stop doing his job either. That said, even though a lot has changed over the past year and some of Greg's wild predictions have come true, there's a lot going against him too. Take his feud with Tiger Woods, for instance. When things were getting a bit too out of hand with the antitrust lawsuits and all that, the PGA Tour legend came out to present an idea for how things could go back to normal. And for him, there was only one hurdle stopping golf peace: Greg Norman. He said that the Aussies burned too many bridges during his time as the league's CEO. So the only way Jay and the gang talk about a potential solution would be to sideline Greg and come up with some new structure. And you know what? That's what the reports have been saying about the merger too. Apparently, the reason why the PIF got the deal done is that they agreed to sideline Norman. It's hard to imagine Jay wanting to work with Greg anyway, especially after all the back and forth that's happened between them over the past year. Besides, some of the things he said about LIV have been super problematic too, like the time he defended the Saudi government. Remember, this was at a time when LIV was the single most controversial thing in sports. Every single week, golfers were being questioned about their stance on the Saudi government and its human rights issues, including the alleged murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And well, a lot of them didn't have great responses, with Phil Mickelson calling the Saudis crazy motherfuckers. If you thought that was bad, though, then brace yourself for Greg's answer, because he straight up said humans make mistakes and we should move on. Plus, every time someone brought up these issues again, he kept saying he didn't care about it, because the only thing he was focused on was promoting golf. I mean, fair enough, since Jay didn't have much to say after the deal either, but that doesn't make Greg's words any better. Honestly, The Aussie's had a target on his back for a long time now, with both fans and golfers hating the way he conducts himself. And even when he's not involved in some golf-related controversy, there's other stuff happening in his life that lands him in trouble. For instance, he was recently sued by a high school girl's family because she was assaulted during a party hosted by his daughter at his house. The dude's a walking PR disaster, so it's not surprising to see the PIF distance themselves from him. That said, Greg's not paying any attention to those reports. He's acting like he's still spearheading this whole thing. He says there are great things planned for the league in the future, and it's business as usual. Plus, he's also been the league's biggest supporter from day one because no matter how many people questioned its future and business model, he was adamant that it was going to be successful eventually. In fact, during a Fox News interview, he went as far as to say that not a single person has told him that LIV's a bad idea, which again is a big claim considering how everyone was criticizing the league. And before the merger, the Aussie also wrote a scathing letter to Jay, saying his league was just getting started and that one day he'd regret his decision to ban LIV members from the tour. Again, he wasn't wrong, since Jay doesn't have a choice but to let these guys back into the tour. Sure, he may impose some extra fines or add some conditions, but I'm sure no one would actually mind that. Besides, even if Greg was being criticized for his opinions back then, people aren't doing that anymore, because the attention's now shifted to Jay since he's also made a deal with the PIF. That said, even though the LIV CEO likes to show he's confident and doesn't care about anyone else, that's not the reality, because when he was called up to the Senate to testify about the merger, he refused. So he's not ready to face any questions either. And honestly, I get it. After all, there's actual documents about him getting fired from his position. Yep. We got this bombshell during the U.S. Senate subcommittee where it was confirmed that Jay wanted Norman out before agreeing to the merger. Apparently, the OG proposal was supposed to put the PGA Tour in charge of global golf, meaning LIV would also come under Monahan's control. Why? Well, they said that since the league only had 14 events, there was no real need to have separate executive management for it, because the tour's got the ability to manage those as well. And so, with that shift in power, Greg would get fired too. Though it's worth noting that the agreement was never actually signed. Instead, the PIF proposed a totally different arrangement where Norman would leave his CEO's seat and go into an advisory role instead. I mean, with the way Greg's been sidelined and the way he's hated by the tour's officials and members, it'd be a massive win for him if he did somehow stick around after the merger. Sure, it may not be quite what he'd want, especially after all the work he's put into LIV Golf, but hey, at least it's better than getting fired, right? Also, let's not forget that he's still a legend of the sport, and he played a huge role in convincing some players like Cam Smith to join the league. Greg might be controversial, but the thing is, he's also effective. So there you have it. From getting fired from LIV because of his controversial nature to claiming that the league's going to continue for many more years, this was Greg Norman's appalling response to the LIV golf controversy.